is that? Talk a little bit about some of the terminology like cost of attendance and financial need and expected family contribution, along with types of aid and sources that you can look for to find financial aid. We'll talk about the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, that students can complete each year in order to acquire funding for higher education from the federal and state government. And then also we'll talk a little bit about scholarships at the end. All right, so let's dive into what is financial aid. Financial aid is basically sources of money that someone would get to help them meet their college expenses. These college expenses may include the normal things that you would think of, like tuition and fees and books, but also could include housing, food, and transportation. So financial aid is anything like a grant, scholarship, loan, or some kind of paid employment as a work study student that allows for someone to be able to pay for these costs for school. So it wouldn't be a regular job, but a paid employment as a work study as a type of aid that we'll talk about. When we look at some of the terminology, the first thing that we want to talk about is the cost of attendance. So cost of attendance is actually the amount of money that a school estimates that it will cost to attend their school and live while you're attending their school. So these things include things that you might normally think about, like tuition and fees. That's something that you're not used to paying for tuition and fees at your current school. So that's an added cost for higher education. Books and supplies are also something in addition. But then there's things like housing and food, which, depending on if you as a student or as a parent, your student is going to go off to college, they may have to have housing. If they're going to stay local and go to a local university or college, the housing and food expenses may not be as much as if they moved away. Transportation costs also would vary depending on how far away your student may have to drive to school, or maybe it's somewhere where they have to fly back and forth to get home for holidays and those kind of things. And then there's also a miscellaneous personal expense category. And then we call that kind of like your Walmart money, things that you need for personal hygiene, just to take care of yourself, buy some clothes. That's in the miscellaneous personal expenses. So all of these components together, each school is responsible for determining what their average student is going to pay in these items. So your expenses may be more than that, maybe less, but it's just an estimate of the general student population. So all these things together become the cost of attendance, and that's an important definition to know. The next thing that's important to know is the expected family contribution. Now, this one can get a little bit confusing to students, and I'll explain it, but the good news is you don't really have to know or understand it. But the expected family contribution, or you may hear it referred to as EFC, is when you complete the free application for federal student aid, a calculation is done on the information that you input, and that calculation then becomes an expected family contribution number. So it's a dollar amount the main definition of it is that this is the amount that your family can expect to have to contribute toward a student's education. So that's the definition of it, okay? But really and truly, someone could have a really low EFC, so the lower the better. The lower the EFC, the more likely you are to get financial aid. So it starts at a 0 and can go all the way up into 9999999. If your EFC is a 9999999, you probably wouldn't join this session. Most of our average EFC here at the college is somewhere around the 8 to 10,000, but we have a large number of students that are at a 0 EFC. So these are our highest need students. But just because your EFC is really low doesn't mean that, so it could be 0. So that would say the Department of Education's formula says your family is not expected to contribute anything towards your education. But you know what? That financial aid that you receive may not be enough to cover that cost of attendance fully that we talked about. So for instance, at Collin, a cost of attendance may be somewhere around $16,000. At a university like say UTD or UNT or Texas Tech, that may be somewhere around $23,000 to $25,000. And at a private institution like SMU, for instance, it may be $50,000. So this cost of attendance is going to change based on the institution that you may select, but the expected family contribution is always going to remain the same. So then we put those two things together, the cost of attendance, and we subtract off the expected family contribution, and that calculates something called financial need. So this tells us how much need-based aid your student would be eligible for. And we'll get to an example of that in just a minute. So that expected family contribution and the financial need amount dictate the specific types of aid that a student's eligible to receive. And we'll talk about some of those types of aid. The cost of attendance also acts as a limit to the amount of aid that a student can receive overall. So whatever that cost of attendance is, 16,000, 23,000, 50,000, that's the most aid that you could receive at that particular school. So let's look at an example then that shows, kind of like a cost of attendance at Collin College, a typical College cost of attendance, and a typical university here in the state of Texas. Again, these vary. Mainly, they vary based on the tuition and fee amount. So tuition and fees at Collin, if you live inside Collin County, might be $1,500 for a year to go full-time at our school. Books we estimate to be about $1,500 a semester, again depending on the number of credit hours that a student takes. Room and board, if they're living off of campus, so not living with a parent, might be close to $10,000. That's the R&B stands for room and board. Transportation expenses may be $2,741, and then miscellaneous expenses, that kind of Walmart Mad Money that you need to use just to live off of, is $1,983 for a total of $17,700. If I had an EFC of $8,500, I subtract that. That tells me that I have financial need of $9,200. Now, if you look at a typical university, you would see tuition quite a bit higher, maybe $13,488. Books, maybe a little more or a little less. Room and board maybe more or less. But we're going to be kind of in line with everything pretty much, except maybe the tuition and fees. So you see the cost of attendance that was shown there was $29,740. And that EFC remains the same no matter how expensive of a school that you may choose. So we're talking about $21,240 is the financial need for a student going to this particular school. Now, the good thing is that you really don't have to know and understand your cost of attendance that a school calculates and the EFC and how that formula comes about. When you complete the free application for federal student aid, that EFC is automatically calculated. It's transmitted to the school that you're going to, and they can determine what types of aid that you're eligible for. And each school then is responsible for awarding students based on their what we would call awarding philosophy. So that is the financial need. We'll talk about the different types of aid, and we'll talk about some need-based aid, and we'll talk about some non-need-based aid. So basically, there are 4 types of financial aid that a student would be able to use to pay for their educational cost, or that cost of attendance. The one we like to talk about the least is loans, so I'll get that one knocked out of the way. Loans can become a necessary evil, right? Like the bad thing about it, the good thing about it is easy to get a student loan. You don't have to have for federal student aid, you don't have to have a credit history. You don't have to you don't have to do anything except apply and complete a couple of steps. So you don't go talk to a banker and any of that. It's just the assumption that, hey, you're going to go to a college, you're going to get an education, and you're going to be able to pay these loans back. So it's based on the belief that in the future, a student's going to be in a better position to be able to pay off their student loans. We don't like for students to take out student loans unless they absolutely have to. And if they have to, borrowing less is obviously better. Just because it's going to be less that you have to pay back in the future. So we see lots of problems in higher education with people borrowing a lot of money and then they think that they're going to land that great job. And maybe they don't start out making $75,000 a year. Maybe they start out making 30,000 or 35,000. Then paying that student loan back can sometimes be detrimental. Can cause them not to be able to buy a house or get a good interest rate on the car, things like that. The in the orange section is work study employment. So just about every college and university is going to have a work study program that can be funded from both the federal work study and also there's a Texas work study program that allows a student to get a job at a school and work there and draw a regular paycheck just like a college employee would. But the thought or idea behind them working at the school is that one, is convenient for them to be able to work at school and be able to go back and forth between classes. So it's a convenience factor. And then also that money would help them with their living expenses, maybe help for tuition and fees, books, housing, and food. In the green section would be scholarships. So we'll talk about lots of sources of scholarships that exist. But scholarships are basically free money that's given to students. A lot of times it's based on academic performance, maybe in high school, or academic performance when someone gets to their first or second year in college. They may be offered a scholarship. Most of that money, however, goes to first-time freshmen. So it's kind of a one shot to get that as you are entering into college. Often, if it's offered by a university, those may be renewed for 2 years or 4 years, depending on the type of institution that you go to. And then the fourth category is grants. And so we have grants from the federal government, the state government. Pell Grant may be one of the ones that is very familiar to you. The two that we mentioned on the left are considered self-help aid. The ones on the right are gift aid. So scholarships and grants, you're typically not going to have to pay those back. There's not strings usually attached to those. Some schools, if you get a scholarship, may require you to participate in some volunteer work or something like that, but it's usually not that extensive. All right, so let's look individually at these categories. We'll look at scholarships first. Your biggest source of finding scholarships actually is from the schools that you desire to go to. I know at Collin, our foundation offers scholarships, $1,200, typically $1,250 per year. We give away about 600 of those each year, and we definitely see that a lot of students, and maybe it's because our tuition and fees are so low, $52 a credit hour for a student living in Collin County. But we definitely would like to see more people applying for these. Right now, people have like a 1 out of a 50-50 chance of getting a scholarship. So there's pretty good odds. Whatever school that you're thinking to go to, I encourage you look at the website. So if you are a high school senior or parent of a high school senior this year, a lot of these schools will be really requiring early application. October is already passed, but a lot of schools have deadlines in even November and December or early January that they're going to require you to apply for admission and get accepted and apply for any scholarships. The best way for those university college scholarships, go to their website and search for scholarships. Look at all those that may be ones that you would qualify for as a student, and then and apply. Make sure you see the deadlines and you give yourself enough lead time, because often scholarships an application may require reference letters or may require a resume to be attached as well. Resume might not include work. You may have never had a job, but it might include volunteer things and other things from an academic standpoint that you've been involved in. So the scholarships can also come from private sources. So there's lots of clubs and organizations that may have this scholarship programs like Kiwanis Club, Boys and Girls Club. There may be choir scholarships and things of that nature from us from different activities that you participated in. Obviously, if you're an athlete, scholarships are also something that quite often is offered. That's why you want to you apply early and figure out the best path for getting. And I would say don't just stop at one and say, well, I hope I get this one. I mean, go for the gold. It's your chance to get the scholarship to help you with your funding. A lot of these private scholarships that come from clubs or organizations may just be for a 1 year, so they may be $500 or they may be $1,000. Obviously, that would help buy some books or maybe pay for a class or two, depending on where you're going. The next type of aid that I want to specifically talk about is also part of the gift aid, and that would be grants. So the biggest one being Pell Grants. It's a federal need-based grant. Scholarships, for the most part, are typically not need-based. They're based on academic or some kind of performance level. They can be based on need, but for the most part, probably 80% of scholarships are based on some type of academic performance or athletic performance or a talent that a person would have. Grants are going to be typically are almost always need-based. There is a federal teach grant for people that want to pursue they want to teach in a high needs field, such as a foreign language or a math or science area, and they want to do that in a low income school. So the Department of Education gives a $4,000 grant that's not need based. Someone's parents could be millionaires and they could still get that grant. They just have to spend time working as a teacher. It's 2 years for every year that you get the grant. So you have an 8-year responsibility for teaching in that area. But outside of that one, the only federal and state grants that we're going to work with would be need-based, and so strictly is a matter of doing the FAFSA, knowing the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution, which a school is going to calculate that for you. But grants don't have to be paid back is the good thing. Then the work study employment category, I know at Collin we pay $11 an hour to our work study students. It allows them to gain valuable experience, maybe in an office setting or a computer lab setting or a science lab setting, be able to make a little bit of money and have the convenience of being on their campus where they're going to school. And then that last section, loans. Most of our loans come from the federal government. So what you'll hear is Stafford loans. You'll also hear them referred to as direct loans. So the schools are required to offer student loans if they participate in the federal student loan program. These loans can be both need-based loans and can be need and non-need based. So those are the two types that a student can borrow. It's really, the amount is really limited, especially if you're going to an expensive school. So for a dependent student, which most of you are going to have either be dependent students or your student is a dependent student, meaning that you are under the age of 24, you're not married, you don't have a child that you provide more than 50% as a student. This is the student we're talking about. You don't provide more than 50% of someone else's support. Then a dependent student can borrow up to $5,500 per year. So that's not a lot when you talk about going to a school that their cost of attendance may be $23,000. Parents, though, can also borrow money. At Collin, we don't have too many of these. We probably do 15 or 20 a year just because our costs are so low. But you can, as a parent, as long as you pass they do a stumbling for the word here, I'm sorry. They do a credit check. I think it's still kind of a low bar, but if a student, if a parent can borrow up to the cost of attendance, minus any other aid that the student's already receiving. So if I had $16,000 cost of attendance and I did not get any grants, I wasn't eligible for any grants maybe, then I could get $5,500 as a student. That was still going to leave me $10,500. So a parent could borrow the rest of that $10,500 in a PLUS loan, assuming that they pass the credit check for the Department of Education. So that's a little bit about student loans. There are private loans in addition to that. And so all these loan companies offer different terms and different interest rates. So you really have to compare, but typically the best way to go is with the federal student loans and the PLUS loans. They have typically better repayment. The loans don't have to be repaid if it's the student loan until after they have finished school. So as long as they stay enrolled each fall and spring semester in at least 6 hours, their loan would be in a deferment. So they would not have to make payments. They could pay the interest if they wanted, or they could start making payments, or as a parent, you can start making payments on that student loan, but it would not come due until 6 months after that student had finished school, whether that was graduation or if a student just decided not to continue their education. All right, so let's look at the sources of financial aid that are available. And the biggest one is the federal government. And so I've already mentioned the Pell Grant. There's also a supplemental education opportunity grant. There's the student loans that we talked about. So they provide the majority of sourcing for financial aid. At Collin College, we process about $42 million of financial aid each academic year. Out of that 42 million, it is probably close to 39 million that comes from the federal government. The states then typically have some programs that are available, and that's true for the state of Texas. If you go to a community college, you might be eligible for a Texas Education Opportunity Grant. If you went to a university, there's something called the Texas Grant, and these are need-based grants that are given to Texas residents. And so the way to get these is definitely to apply early. We will start awarding here at Collin in the late November, early December, and those funds for us will typically be gone by the end of January. And that's true, for our university partners as well. Colleges and universities are typically the next largest source of student aid, just because of all the scholarships that they give. We also have a grant that we give to students that are that is a need-based grant that's typically $1,200 per year. So that kind of covers at Collin at least the cost of tuition and fees. Again, the way to get that money is to apply early. And then private sources. So there's private scholarships, there's private student loans. Not too many private grants, but could run across one of those. And then employers is another source of financial aid. You may even think about your employer, where you work or where your parents may work, that may have some type of scholarship program. Chick-fil-A has a scholarship program that their employees can apply for. So many employers are doing those kind of things, and they want their employees to be the benefactors of those scholarships. All right, let's look at the federal government. We have said that it's the largest source of financial aid. Aid is awarded primarily on the basis of financial need. The only exception to that really is under the loans. There's a non-need based student loan. So basically anybody can qualify for at least the non-need based loan. So even if your parents are super wealthy, you can still get that $5,500 in a student loan. But the rest of it pretty much is going to be need-based. So it's going to be looking at that cost of attendance for the school minus the expected family contribution. You must apply each year using the FAFSA. So every year that application opens up on October the 1st. So for this coming fall that will be here in another 9 months, that application will actually open this past October. So you can get off of this presentation after we finish and you could actually complete that free application for federal student aid uh, tonight. You could get it done. There is eligibility requirements that have to be met. For instance, to get federal student aid, you have to either be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen. Eligible non-citizen might be a permanent resident or someone that has been granted asylum for the United States. So there are those categories where students must meet that requirement. You also have to graduate from high school. So I know this may be the senior year for many of the people in our audience. Don't give up, keep pushing through, because you want to graduate in order to go to college and receive financial aid. So there are some requirements like that, and your financial aid office, wherever you're going to school, will help you navigate all of those things. Federal student aid, we talked about the Pell Grant, Iraq, Afghanistan service grant. These are for students whose parents were killed in the line of duty in Iraq or Afghanistan. There's a federal supplemental education opportunity grant over on the next slide. And so that will kind of, that lists the types of aid that come from the federal government there, including the loans, the bottom, the work study, and the teach grant that I mentioned earlier. For the most part, the biggest source by far, for us, we give out about, of our 42 million, 20 million of it is from Pell Grants, and then almost an equal amount, or approaching an equal amount, comes from the federal direct student loan programs. So if we look at states next, typically there's going to be a residency requirement. So in other words, if you wanted to go to a Texas public school, as far as college or university, you may be eligible for Texas aid. But if you decided to go to, say, the University of Oklahoma, University of Arkansas, to another state, Texas is not going to allow you to take their student financial aid to another school. So they want you to come to Texas schools. So that's where they're going to give it. In the same vein, if you're going to go to University of Oklahoma, they're not going to give you any aid that may apply to Oklahoma students, because that's for their residents that have paid taxes and help support the initiatives and the funds that are raised for state aid. So basically, if you want state aid, you would have to stay within the state of Texas. The award is based on both merit and need. So there are a few scholarship programs on the state level. Most of it is need-based. And it's going to, on this, so for the state, and I don't think I mentioned this, when you do the free application for federal student aid, you are applying for both federal and state aid. Okay, so there's not a separate application that you would need to complete for Texas state aid. Do the FAFSA, that allows us to determine which students are eligible for federal, state, or both. The deadlines vary by states. So of course, all we really care about here is Texas, because that's the only place this viewing audience can really receive state aid. So if you were going to a university, they do have a priority deadline that is January the 15th. So you want to make sure that you have done the FAFSA by that date to be considered for any state aid. Colleges, community colleges aren't required to abide by that. But some of them may. So the best thing is just get your FAFSA done and get it done prior to January. In fact, I really strongly encourage you to do it in the month of November, so that you can be at the front of the line for receiving any need-based aid if you were eligible for it. All right, Texas state aid programs that we have. Universities are able to give the Texas grant. So that does not apply to community colleges, only to universities. But the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant is only for community colleges. The Texas Public Education Grant Program, or we call it TPEG, that money actually comes from the school, but is required by legislative action for us to give to need-based students. If you went to a private school, they may participate in the state's tuition equalization grant program. And then there is also a state loan. There's also there is a Texas work study program that works exactly the same as our federal work-study program. So next category is colleges and universities. Colleges and universities are going to award aid on the basis of both merit and need. Again, most of that is going to be based on merit. So they're going to be looking at some SAT score, ACT score. They're going to be looking at a high school GPA, those kind of things. The aid may be gift aid or self-help aid. At gift aid being that it's some type of grant or works, or it could be self-help, like some kind of work study program that the college itself offers. The information from the FAFSA can be used to help a school determine who to give that aid to. And the deadlines and application requirements vary by the institution. So it's important to be tracking the schools that you may be interested in, looking to see what are their financial aid deadlines. Some even have a deadline for when the free application for federal student aid has to be completed. So best to peruse those websites, look and see what deadlines there are for scholarships, what types of aids that they may have available. And then we'll go to private sources of financial aid. Those could be foundations that raise money specifically to provide scholarships. So a lot of universities have their own foundations that help provide scholarship dollars. Businesses, it may be churches or civic organizations, charitable organizations. So think of those as you're looking for opportunities for scholarships. Many of these institutions that are mentioned here may have a scholarship program. And again, the deadlines for applications are going to vary by school. I know that Plano, the counselors there have always been impressed by the scholarships that they advertise, and I believe there's a portal that where your students can search for other grants there. And start looking for those early. They're going to give the money away soon. They're not usually holding money for late bloomers that start the process for May or June. So encourage you to do that. And now it's FAFSA time. So we're going to actually talk a little bit about the free application for federal student aid. So now I've got your appetite weighted for all these types of aid and the grants. But the only way that you're going to know what you're going to qualify for and how much you're going to qualify for is just to get the application done. So let's look at the first step that we would ask for a parent and a student to do, and that is to obtain something called an FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. So this is actually a credential that you're going to get in order to kind of do business with the Department of Education, the Office of Federal Student Aid. So this becomes your username, and then you create a password in this. But this is your identification to help you not only with doing the FAFSA, but also doing other things. If you want to take out a student loan, you're going to have to do entrance counseling, sign a master promissory note. That's going to happen with an FSA ID. It's also going to be something that you're going to use every year because you have to do that free application for federal student aid on an annual basis, again, as early as October 1 of every year. Catch my breath for a minute here because I feel like I'm talking like 90 miles an hour.
You're giving us great information. I've been answering some questions in the chat that have popped up as people have had them. So I think we're doing good.
Okay. All right. So the place to apply is wow. I think that this is like totally wrong. This fsaid.ed.gov. So I apologize. FAFSA.gov. It's FAFSA.gov. I'm sorry. This is right. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm talking about the FSA ID. The FSA ID, that is the website that you use to obtain the FSA ID. I thought we had a typo. I'm already off to the FAFSA. I forget that I'm trying to get you guys to get an FSA ID. So you get your FSA ID by going to fsaid.ed.gov, and that's where you're going to that you're going to do a setup for your username and password.
I would like to ask this question now as we're on this topic. Who should create the FSAID? Should the parent create it, or should the student have one, or should there be two? How should that work?
Yeah, so you're like reading my mind. You're reading like my mind, what, one sentence ahead. So good question, great question. The FSAID has to be, the student has to have one. So the student always would need to create one. And then one parent would need to. Not necessary for both parents to do it. You can, but that FSAID, the other important thing is that that's going to be what a student uses to sign and a parent uses to sign their electronic application. So once the student and a parent, if you have multiple students going to school, then you would use your FSAID on both students. So that's kind of a once in a lifetime thing that you should create, and then it's always there. There's ways to reset that password, and you know, if you don't forget, if it's a few years until your next student, but you'll need to use that every year. So remember that username and ID and put it in a safe place. I think some of these password, like they also want you to set up some password hints and things like, and I just say be cautious about that. A lot of people wind up getting locked out of their FSAID account, and then when it comes time to do the FAFSA, like they can't remember their hints because they put what was their favorite movie, and that was their favorite movie in 2020. But you guys know we want to forget about 2020. We want to move on to 2021, and we're going to have another favorite movie. And so by it's time to do the 21, 22, or the 22, 23 FAFSA, we're going to forget what our favorite movie is. So I encourage you to use things that are going to be pretty static for you when you set up that. So that's just a tip. So after you have obtained that FSAID, then you're going to go into the FAFSA and actually start working to complete that. So remember that the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is the application for the student. Okay. So, I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that students are the only ones out there doing it. I know parents often get hands-on and helping their student make sure they complete everything, especially since if you don't get financial aid, you may be the one left paying the bill. But here's a big tip that I would give. When you're doing that, just make sure that you remember who you're doing it for and what the question is asking, because we often get a parent going in to help a student, and when it says what's your name, they put their name like they're doing it for themselves. But going into this application, it's the student that's completing this application. It's the parent that's contributing some of the information on that application, and it's the parent and the student that then are signing that application electronically. We say FAFSA.gov. There used to be FAFSA.com that charged people to process the application. So just a note that it is free. We'll talk at the end about some scam things, but there are people that want to get your personal information and tell you about all these scholarships and aid that they can get for your student. But I would say to be very skeptical and cautious about that. So basically, this application is going to collect some demographic information and financial information about the student and the parent. Information is going to be used to calculate that expected family contribution that we were talking about earlier. And then the colleges are going to use that EFC to award financial aid based on what they know their cost of attendance to be. And that cost of attendance is disclosed to the student. Often you can find that on the school's website or in the student's portal. It is available in English and Spanish, so students can toggle back and forth on the FAFSA for assistance in completing that application. So next we'll talk about continuing in the free application for federal student aid. That may be filed at any time after October 1st. That's the October 1st prior to the new academic year starting. So for 21-22, that was this past October, just last month. So most colleges set a FAFSA filing deadline. Like for Collin College, you can file all the way up until June of 22 actually. for the 21-22 year, but some schools may have an earlier cutoff. All right, let's look at some of the common things on the FAFSA. So there is the FAFSA on the web. That's going to the website on a regular computer to FAFSA.gov. There's also the ability to download the My Student Aid mobile app. Students can actually complete their FAFSA on this app right on their phone. And you can also go back and forth between. So you can complete part of your application on the mobile app, sign out, and then go on to a computer, finish your application. So those two methods are available. This next one shows what the login screen to that's going to look like. So if it's your first time to do a FAFSA, your first time as a student to do the FAFSA, you're going to click on Start Here. So you've obtained your FSA ID, you're going to click Start Here. That's going to take you in and start asking you for questions related to your FAFSA. After you have already created your account and got started on the application, then you'd be a returning user and you would go in maybe to make a correction on your FAFSA. Maybe you realize that you put some information in incorrectly, or you initially only put one school and you kind of changed your mind and you want your financial aid application to be sent to another school. You could go and add an additional school. And it's also a way that you could view your student aid report, which is a report that you get back after you complete the free application for federal student aid. So those are just things that you can, and you can also copy your application over to an additional year. So like once you complete your 21-22 FAFSA, when it comes time to do the 22-23, you could go in and copy that application forward and then just update the items that are required to be updated. Okay, so now we got you into the application itself. Here's where you would mark whether I am the student or I am a parent or preparer or student from a freely associated state. So there are those two choices. Simply click next, and then that's going to take you into the body of that application. On the mobile phone, it's really similar. You are going to has the ability on the mobile app to begin, complete, save, and submit the application. And information is protected the same as on the FAFSA on the web. So lots of security, and you will notice that when you start trying to establish your FSA ID, and they have all these security features and two-part authentication. So keep that in mind. All right, IRS data retrieval tool. I stress this is something that's really important. About 30 to 35% of students get selected for a process called verification. You really want to stay away from that if you can. Sometimes it's not possible. Some of the aspects of verification is just random, but often the Department of Education may see something that they go, this doesn't look exactly quite right. Maybe it's that a student has been making multiple changes to their application and their EFC keeps changing, almost like someone's trying to play with the data. So they may ask us to do, may ask the school to do verification. It may be just based on the amount of taxes that someone says they paid versus their income. But if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, it significantly lowers the rate at which you might be selected for verification. So basically this tool, during the application itself, there's an option to go to the IRS website and pull that data back into your FAFSA. So that way you don't have to figure out what line on your income tax return is adjusted gross income versus taxes paid. That information gets pulled back into the FAFSA, and they consider that if you were selected for verification, they consider the IRS data retrieval tool to be the same as being verified. So the IRS does authenticate that. I mean, you have to enter the information from your tax return. I think I got out there to do something and it asked me to validate using a credit card, so they could tell that that credit card did belong did belong to me. So it's fairly sophisticated, and they take the security of our students and their taxpayers very seriously. All right, so next, it also there are certain tax filers that cannot use the IRS data retrieval tool. So it may not be possible for you if you did not indicate on the FAFSA that a tax return was completed. It asks you, have you completed a tax return? If you say no, you can't use the IRS data retrieval tool. If your marriage date is January of 2020 or later, it realizes, because you're using the 2019 tax year, it realizes that you wouldn't have been married at the time, and you have to use the income of both you and your spouse at the current time. So even though you weren't married for 2019, you're still required to use the income that you both had separately before you were married. Okay, so those are some reasons why. So it will ask you, do any of these reasons apply to you? And then if not, it will direct you to the IRS data retrieval tool if you so desire. All right, so here's some general student information that I want you to know about. First of all, to get financial aid, you have to be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. We talked about that with a permanent resident. Males, you have to register for selective service. So there's the ability to register for selective service as part of the free application for federal student aid. So keep that in mind. You can do that right there. You can also go to sss.gov to register yourself, but males have to do that between the age of 18 and 26. You have to have a social security number as a student to apply. No drug-related conviction, and there's a couple of questions on the application that talk about that. If that were to be a concern for you, just read through those questions. You also have to have graduated high school and be enrolled in an eligible program at an eligible school. So there are some schools, maybe some for-profit schools, that might not be eligible for certain types of aid, but generally a private or public institution is going to have eligible programs. So do I use my parents' information on the FAFSA? So to you students, if you're under the age of 24, and there's a long list of questions that it's going to present to you, it knows based on your birth date and the check that it does with the Social Security Administration. It knows your age is verified off of that. If you're not 24, then it's going to go and ask, are you married? If you're not married, it's going to go in and ask you some of these additional questions. So if someone is an orphan or a ward of the court or in foster care, that status would cause that student not to have to include parent information on their FAFSA. If they're so this is ways that you would use your parents' information. So if you are not an orphan, or you're not a ward of the court or in foster care, if you're not under legal guardianship, then you're going to use your parents' information. If you're not a veteran, not serving on active duty, you would use your parents' information. Next, we'll talk about the signatures that are required at the end of the application. So it's going to ask you for all this demographic information, all this income information. Just pay attention when you go through there between what pages are specific to the student versus what pages are specific to the parent. At the end, you're going to be required to provide that electronic signature using your FSA ID. The student and one parent for dependent students are going to have to sign that. If for some reason you're an independent student, because maybe you were in foster care, or you've gotten married, or you have a child that you provide more than 50% of their support, you would not be required to have a parent signature in that case. If for some reason you couldn't sign with your FSA ID, there is an opportunity to talk to your school and get a signature page that we can submit to the Department of Education as proof that you have signed that. All right, frequent errors. We talked a little bit about some of these Social Security numbers. I mean, we often see that a parent sitting down, helping their student do their FAFSA. When I was a kid, we learned our social security number because it was like on everything. It was on our checks. It was on our driver's license. You just knew that number. Now I'm finding that, my 18-year-olds, they can't remember their social security number. So they may be trying to guess at it when they're sitting down to do the free application for student aid and get those mixed up. Or as a parent, you may be sitting down at the computer and you have two children, and you're doing it for your younger student, and you accidentally use the social security number of your favorite child. Okay, I can't hear you guys laugh because I know you're on mute, but I will assume that you're laughing at that one because I know you don't have a favorite child. But social security numbers, just make sure you're using them that correctly. Also, like date of birth and names. So sometimes the student may be filling out the FAFSA for their and including their parent information, and they've always known their mom by Brenda, but you just go by Brenda, and your name is actually Llewellyn, and so the student may put that Brenda in there. That's not what's on your social security card, so it's going to balance. So they just need to make sure that you're using the name that's on your social security card, the date of birth that's attached to that. Another common error is people that are divorced, widowed, remarried, or the parental information that's on there. So in a household where the parents are both married, that's pretty easy. They're going to use both parents' information. If it's a case of a parent that is divorced or widowed or even separated, they are only going to use the parent's income from which they derive the majority of their support. So that may be the parent that they live with, or it could be a different parent. If that parent that is providing more than 50% of their support is remarried, they would use the income information from both the parent and the step parent. So that can get a little bit tricky. If a couple is separated, that they would only provide the income from one parent, as long as they're maintaining two different households, and if it's a separation. Also, income earned by parents, step parents. So if your parent is remarried, you would need to use the income of both people. Untaxed income, that's another good reason why you should use the IRS data retrieval tool. It helps with that. U.S. income taxes paid, that problem's eliminated if you use the IRS data retrieval tool. Household size, you would think that wouldn't be a common error because most people would know who lives in their household. But there are some things like you may forget that you have a older brother or sister that's going to college. As long as they're an undergraduate student, they could be counted in the household of their parent, even though they may not be living there. The number of household members in college, so forgetting that, some people just may forget about some kids that they have that, I don't know, maybe they keep downstairs and they forget about them. Real estate and investment net worth. The FAFSA asks for net asset information. So sometimes people get confused and they may think, oh, my real estate, I need to put my house. It's not the house that you live in, but if you had investment income, or you had rental property, or you had a vacation home, then you would be required to list that. So often people may forget about that, or we often see people trying to include their home in their real estate, and you don't have to list the home that you live in and its value. All right, so let's talk about once you submit the application, you have signed it, you submit it, it's going to pop up and tell you an initial information about whether you're eligible for a Pell Grant or whether you're eligible for student loans, which everybody basically is going to be eligible for student loans, either need or non-need based loans. And so you do get that information along with some supplemental information from your school. You may need to go, so once you submit it, you may need to go back and make corrections. So you can go back into the FAFSA.gov website and work to make that happen.
I'm sorry, Alan. I think I might have gotten off track. I was answering a couple questions.
Okay.
Am I on the right slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So special circumstances can happen. to parents. For instance, I mean, wow, we've been dealing with all this stuff in 2020. People have lost their jobs. And so the FAFSA is based off of the 2019 tax year. And maybe in 2019, you say, man, I had a pretty good job, but I either had to take a lot of reduced hours or, my salary was cut or flat out lost my job and was on unemployment. So there are some things where the 2019 tax year is not maybe a good reflection of, your ability to pay for your students' education. So there are some things. So you basically you do the FAFSA just like you based off the 2019, but you would go to the financial aid office of the institution that you're planning to go to and talk to them about your particular situation and why the income that's associated with that. Or maybe you take a one-time drawdown. You had to take a drawdown from your IRA because you were going on unemployment or had some crazy unexpected expense. Sometimes financial aid offices can do something to change the data on your FAFSA uh, uh, for situations like that. So the colleges are going to review that. The decisions of the school's final. So I mean, you may say, "Hey, I had to take out $50,000 to pay my bills," and the school, one school might not agree to make a change, where another one might. So it's just based on the school's professional judgment whether to do that. The next slide, we talk about some of these special circumstances. Could be a parent or a spouse death. So, I mean, you had a joint return for 2019, a parent passes away. That's going to be something where a school would step in and help make a special circumstance to change that income amount. Unusual uncovered medical dental expenses. These have to be expenses that you had to pay. But like, let's say that you had to pay $60,000 worth of medical expenses. If you can show proof that you paid that, that can actually help to adjust that EFC formula. Loss of employment. Could maybe you have a special needs child that has causes you to have extraordinary child care, something like that. A school can take into consideration. It could be a divorce that's happened that's caused an excessive expense. So those are some examples of some of those things. Very important. Once you do the FAFSA, don't say, "Good, I've got it done, I'm home free." You need to make sure that you follow up. Most schools, when you apply for admission, you're going to be given a username and password that allows you to access a student portal for that school. They're also probably going to give you an email account that they will use to communicate with you. You need to watch those email accounts. You need to follow up with your school. You need to check early about the status. Because, for instance, just to do the FAFSA, and you say, "Okay, I did it just like Alan Pixley said to do. I went on November the 4th and I did my FAFSA." Well, if you got selected for verification, you might not get considered for all of that special grant aid that I said that schools give away first. So make sure that you follow up with your school, that if you were selected for verification, that you submit that you submit your high school transcripts, anything that school is requesting. Make sure you do that so it doesn't hinder your aid.
Alan, I want to make sure that I'm giving correct information. Way back when I did the FAFSA, our EFCs came to us in the mail. How will they get that EFC that's verifying that they did that FAFSA correctly and everything has been submitted?
Okay, so great question. Yeah, so back in the mail days that happened a lot. They will still mail it if you don't use an email address on your FAFSA. But I mean, 99% of the people are using an email on their FAFSA. So once that gets processed, that student aid report gets sent to the student gets an email and says, "Click here for the link to access that." You would sign in using your FSA ID. You're basically going to that FAFSA.gov website, and that's where you would see your student aid report. At Collin College, we do give scholarships away. There's the contact information. That information's out on our website, specifically for Collin. We typically are going to open up our fall application process January the 15th. But remember, universities typically are opening their scholarship programs up in October, November. and they typically will have deadlines in November, December, maybe January. The last thing that we'll talk about is there is something called the Texas application for student financial aid. This is not a separate application that the general population needs to do, but if you are a student and you were brought to this, you came to the United States and you didn't come, as a resident. There may still be opportunities to help you. You're not eligible for federal student aid if you're not living in the United States as a citizen or an eligible non-citizen. But in some cases, a student that graduates from a Texas school and spent 3 years in the state of Texas, even though you may not be here on as a resident of the state of Texas that was authorized by the federal government to come here. If you graduated from high school and you spent 3 years in high school, there could be a special category of aid that you can apply for. So each school has this task for the Texas application for student financial aid. So again, this only is going to apply to like less than 1% of the population. But if that's your category and you can't do the FAFSA because you don't have the social security number, or you're not a citizen or eligible non-citizen, this could be an option for you. So it's kind of a comparison. But definitely you can jump on our website at collin.edu and you can see more information about the TASFA if that applies to you. So I know we spent just a tad bit over an hour tonight. We know that you have choices of where you're going to go to school or where you're going to send your students. We'd be happy to take care of them here at Collin. But we want you to know, as the only public institution in Collin County, public institution of higher education, we care about the students that are in Collin County. And so even, if you were to call me up and say, Alan, my student is going to go to Dallas College, or was going to go to Texas Tech or Texas A&M, we're still happy to help you in any way, because we want the citizens of Collin College to be successful and get that education. So our contact information is here on our website. You can find all kinds of contact information, including my specific contact information. If there's anything that we can do for you in the future, super glad to do that. My last thing, I would like to recognize Miriam Chasm, who's on here with me tonight, and she's been observing me. She's one of our call center specialists. So if you call that number that's there, there's a good chance that you might be able to speak to Miriam, and she'd be happy to help you with any questions that you have about admissions or financial aid. And so with that, if there's anybody that wants to stay on and ask any questions, I'd be glad to do that. Otherwise, you guys have a safe night and enjoy doing that free application. And I hope there's lots of money that comes your way.
Again, thank you so very much. I answered quite a few questions in the chat as we were going. There may be some people that want to stay on. I do want to reiterate what he said. They are here to help serve the residents of Collin County, whether you're going to attend Collin College or not. So if you have some of you had some very specific questions, I think it might be best to give them a call about your specific situation.
Indeed, always glad to help. Thank you so much, Ms. James. Appreciate it.
Let's see if we have any questions pop up. We're getting lots of thank yous from the families that were here with us.